Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto has harem in the Uchiha clan part 1. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. Konohagakure was considered one of the strongest of the 5 great ninja villages, once the strongest, until the Kyuubi attack. 6 years ago the great Biju had suddenly appeared in the middle of the village, and quickly began to lay waste to the village. Despite the fact that the shinobi of the village, including the former Hokage, had fought fiercely to force it back, all hope had seemed lost until the 4th Hokage had appeared, and transported the beast away. In the end, he gave his life to seal the mighty creature away in a small boy. 3rd Hokage had stepped forward then, to once more take the mantle of Hokage. Under his guidance, the village had begun recovering from the devastating episode. For the Kyuubi had not left only physical scars on the village, but more invisible ones as well. In the aftermath of the attack, the Uchiha clan had fallen under the suspicions of the higher-ranking members of the village, suspicions that they were involved in the sudden attack causing them to be ostracized from the rest of the Uchiha endured the mistrust directed at them. However, the leaders of the clan became increasingly angry and unsatisfied at what they viewed as a near-century-long discrimination against them. The final straw came when the Uchiha had been made to live in secluded corner of Konoha, separated from the rest of the village. And thus the road to true conflict began. The ostracized clan began plotting to take the power they thought so rightfully belonged to them. The plot progressed further and further, and the Hokage and elders of the village soon became aware of it. In an attempt to ease the tensions, the 3rd began to try negotiating with the clan, without revealing his knowledge of the plot. The attempts were in vain, as they rebuffed every attempt. That brings us to the beginning of the story, as the tensions begin to approach their apex, and a man was attempting to stop the plot of his clan, only to be intercepted by other forces at work in the village. At the same time, a certain blonde-haired boy was on his way to train for the academy. This boy didn't know that he had the blood of one of Konoha's founding clans flowing through his veins. He also didn't know that that blood would save his life on this day. NUC. It was just past midday in Konoha, and the sun shone brightly. A pleasant, cool breeze swept through the village. All around, the village was interspersed with lush greenery. The streets bustled with happy inhabitants, unaware of the tension building between the village and one of its most prominent clans. In the area near the training grounds for shinobi, Naruto Uzumaki, the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi, though he didn't know that, was walking towards his favorite training ground, which was situated along the Naka River. The emerald-colored vegetation was just beginning to show the slightest encroachment of yellow, red, and brown in its vibrant color, showing the gradual change from summer to autumn. The breeze produced a constant rustling sound around the boy. Though he couldn't see it yet, he could hear the quiet rush of water from the Naka River beyond the trees. The sun shone down through the treetops onto his golden blonde hair. Despite how distinctive his hair was, perhaps the most unique thing about him was the 3 whisker marks on each of his cheeks. His clothes were sturdy, the black shirt and tan shorts being perfect for shinobi training. If people who knew him had seen the boy, they would have been surprised by the sad contemplation in his electric blue eyes. Naruto had just begun the academy, and he was on his way to practice his skills, after another disappointing day of his instructors being rather reticent about helping him, simply telling him how to do something, and then going to help others, leaving him to figure out anything he didn't understand. The boy couldn't help but wonder why everyone treated him like that, like they didn't want him around. It had been that way since his memory began just a few short years ago. The small blonde's expression became downtrodden. He thought of the way people treated him, and how it was made worse by the fact he was an orphan. He had no idea who his parents were, or if they were dead or abandoned him. Did they too dislike him like so many others did? Had they abandoned him because they couldn't stand him? He wanted a family more than anything, someone to care about him like all the other kids seemed to have. Every time someone had come to adopt a kid at the orphanage, he had always felt hope they would pick him. But they didn't. People would just give him a cold look like everyone else, and then pick another child. Finally, it got to a point where he had begged the old man to let him live in his own apartment, so he didn't have to deal with the constant disappointment. He cheered up slightly, thinking of the elderly Hokage. The third was one of the few people he knew that was kind to him and the Ichirakus from his favorite restaurant. They were the things that made life bearable for him, especially the third, who he called Gramps. And he really was like a grandfather to him, always helping him out and making sure he was doing okay, sharing his wisdom with him and telling him cool stories about his experience as a ninja. Despite this bond, he wanted to find out who his parents were one day, so he at least knew where he came from. Even if it turned out they hadn't loved him. Until then, he would just train to be the most badass ninja he could. More specifically, he wanted to be Hokage, like his Gramps, and his idol the fourth. He wanted to be as cool and powerful as them, maybe then the villagers would start to acknowledge him, instead of ignoring him. With significantly more positive thoughts, the blonde turned his mind back to what the task at hand, going to train. It was with a start that he realized, during his inner musing, he had just about reached the edge of the clearing he was heading for. He had just reached the bushes, when he heard two strange noises. The first was rather simple to discern, and not too strange considering where he was. The clang of metal on metal was something that could almost always be found in a training ground. It was the second sound, a strange hiss, that got his attention. It was very loud, easily reaching him. The curious boy walked to the edge of the vegetation, to look through the bushes at the cause of the noise. His curiosity quickly became shock when he beheld the scene in the clearing. On the river bank before him, he saw a completely unexpected sight. There were 7 people locked in mortal combat. And it wasn't the kind that you engaged in for training. There were far too many killing blows being attempted. That wasn't even mentioning the one combatant that looked to be badly injured. 6 of the 7 appeared to be Anbu, but something was off. They wore the typical Anbu mask and cloak, but underneath that the uniforms seemed to vary greatly, and not one seemed to wear the actual Anbu vest and shoulder-length gloves or gray arm guards. What's more, they were attacking the 7th man, throwing ninja tools as well as the occasional water jutsu at him, waves and bullets launching at him, attempting to slam into him. In response, the man would launch back large gouts of fire, so hot Naruto could feel a slight heat from where he stood in the bushes, turning the attacks into steam, the source of the constant hiss he had heard. The 7th man, the one launching fire, was the most interesting. He wore typical attire from the Uchiha clan that he often saw around the village, with a dark high-collar shirt and dark ninja pants, as well as what seemed to be a holster for his tanto, which he used to fend off the weapons, while seemingly appearing and disappearing to dodge the jutsu and move faster. The man had unruly black hair, and a broad nose. The most interesting thing was his right eye, which was crimson, with a black shuriken in the center. His left eye, however, was closed. Naruto could see crimson trail of blood streak down his face from that eye. It was clear that the 6 men were trying to kill the fire-breathing man. He already had several small cuts that looked to be caused by the tanto the supposed Anbu carried, and even a rather serious laceration on his right side, that looked very wide and deep. Almost as if whatever had cut him had glided through him like a knife through butter, skin, muscle, bone, everything. Naruto began to feel a pit of fear grow in his stomach like a lead weight. One thing he knew from his conversations with his surrogate grandfather, the third, was that his Anbu always wore the standard uniform unless on infiltration missions, where they dressed as regular civilians. If these 6 men were dressed as neither, it meant they were not the Hokage's Anbu, or possibly not Anbu at all. One thing was clear, they were attacking a Konoha shinobi, and if they were willing to do that, they would have no issue silencing him. He wasn't stupid. If they went to the trouble of hiding their faces, they didn't want their activities known. They would kill him to stop him from telling anyone. Reality struck him in the face like a war hammer. He needed to get out of there, now. So great was his shock and fear, he didn't pay close enough attention to his surroundings. He began to retreat, without taking his eyes off the clearing. Something he would regret. Naruto took a step back, instantly freezing when a deafening crack rent the air like a gunshot. He looked in terror at the broken branch beneath his foot. The young boy shivered in fear, he didn't want to look up. He could feel the eyes in the clearing turning to him. Against his better judgment, he did, and instantly regretted it. He witnessed the gazes of the false Anbu turning to him in a creepy sort of synchronization. The blonde felt a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach. A wave of fear enveloped him. His veins were flooded with adrenaline and he broke out in a cold sweat. At that moment, the small boy did the only thing he could think of. He turned and ran away from the creepy masked men as fast as he could. Eliminate him, there are to be no witnesses. The monotone voice in the sent a shiver up Naruto's spine. There was zero emotion in the man's voice. Without needing any prompts, the three figures, one wearing a dog mask with 4 eyes, one a demon mask, and the other a regular cat mask, took off in the direction of the panicked academy student, intent on eliminating him. Naruto dashed madly through the forest, not really paying attention to where he was going. He tore through the bushes in a frenzy, his heart threatening to burst from his chest as from IRS extremely high rate from the combination of fear and exercise. The greenery passed by in a blur. All he wanted to do was put as much distance as possible between himself and the masked men. His heart was pounding so hard the beats reverberated throughout his entire chest, and the blood rushed through his veins so fast he could actually hear it pounding in his ears. That was why he barely heard the rustle of leaves behind him. Still, he heard it, and looked back to find out what it was. He almost wished he hadn't. 3 of the fake Anbu were chasing after him, easily dashing through the thick vegetation around the training ground. The most scary part was the methodical pace they kept, never really trying to close the distance between them and himself. Their masks didn't help any either. While the cat masked one on the left was normal enough, the one in the middle, the 4-eyed dog, and the one on the right, a demon with tusks jutting from its lower lip, were very abnormal. They were like twisted versions of the regular Anbu masks. The supposed Anbu never stepped up the pace, seemingly content to keep following him, something that surprised the blonde. Why aren't they trying to catch me? Aren't they worried I'll get away? It made him increasingly worried. They didn't seem like the types to make a bunch of mistakes, so that meant there was some reason they weren't worried about his escape. He had just reached that last conclusion, when the blonde shot out of the bushes, and came to a skidding stop, and his stomach seemed to suddenly drop. The little Jinchuriki had discovered why they hadn't bothered to pick up the pace. They obviously knew the terrain better. He was currently standing on a rocky bank next to the Naka River. Water thundered over the cliff side to churn the waters of the river bellow into a white foam. He stared in shock and despair at the cliff before him. Beside him the river flowed by, and a roar filled the air, along with a fine mist created by the thousands of gallons of falling water. With a sinking heart, Naruto turned around, backing up to the edge of the light gray rocky bank, right up until he felt the light mist on his calves from the river flowing rapidly by. He saw the 3 masked men methodically walking towards him. In that moment, he was certain they were there to kill him. He just knew they didn't have good intentions towards him, and it terrified him, because he knew he couldn't take a single one of them. The Anbu lookalikes seemed to pause in their approach, simply standing there looking at him, the unmoving faces of their masks being very creepy to the 7-year-old boy. Finally, the lead man, the one with the dog mask, spoke. In the relative silence that filled the air, save the sounds occasional of bird calls, and the sound of the waterfall, the man whispered his orders to the 2 flanking him. Seek to incapacitate him by any means. The boy only has to live long enough for us to get him to Lord Danzo to extract the beast. It matters not what happens after that. Naruto tensed. He couldn't make out what was said. The constant roaring of the waterfall filled his ears, blocking out nearly all other sound. Soon as the order was given, the trio began to approach once more, increasing the anxiousness and worries of the blonde. Naruto could tell. He had this feeling in his gut that he couldn't shake. He simply knew they were going to kill him. The boy gulped audibly, before trying to reason with them, to get them to spare him. Even if it was futile. PP please, don't kill me. Won't tell anyone what I saw. Naruto stuttered in fear, not wanting to die. There were so many things he wanted to do. Get the acknowledgement of the people of Konoha, become Hokage, find out who his family was. For a moment, the three paused, and he felt a slight hope that maybe they would spare him. That hope was dashed the next moment, when the lead man spoke. That is not possible. Lord Danzo's orders were clear, there are to be no witnesses to our involvement. Do not struggle, and it will be over quick. The dog-masked one said in a monotone voice. As soon as the man finished his sentence, Naruto's heart sank and he felt as if his stomach had dropped past his knees. His throat constricted, he couldn't breathe, or speak, he could only watch them draw the tip-less tanto they seemed to have in common. In his chest, his heart began beating wildly. Adrenaline flooded his veins, causing his arms to go tingly numb. The dog-masked man shot forward at tremendous speeds, to Naruto at least, beginning to raise his tanto to strike Naruto. The man got closer and closer, and Naruto's perception of the world seemed to slow down to a crawl as his eyes widened in unadulterated fear. All the surrounding sounds faded away into a vacuum of silence, where only his heartbeat could be heard, thumping loudly in his chest. Bum bum. The man raised his tanto extremely slowly. Bum bum. The man reached Naruto, began bringing his tanto down. Bum bum. Naruto felt his eyes involuntarily close. The tanto began to descend upon him. Bum bum. Just when the tanto was about to reach his neck, Naruto's eyes snapped open, glaring at his attacker with eyes that were startlingly different from their previous sparkling blue. Instead, bloody red orbs glared menacingly at the masked man, with a single black tomo mark spinning around each pupil. At the exact same moment, the tanto suddenly halted in midair, as if being held by an invisible hand. Try as he might, he couldn't move it to strike the blonde. The seconds went by, and a slight rustling began in the man's equipment pouches. All the while he looked into the red eyes of the blonde. Sharingan, he muttered questioningly to himself. Naruto didn't hear it in his trance. Not knowing of the occurrence, and simply seeing their partner's blade stopped, the other two moved to strike him as well. As soon as their blades came within an inch of the blonde, they too stopped suddenly. When they did, the dog-masked one felt the tug in his pouches become even more pronounced, and his fellow felt it begin for them. All at once, the sound of tearing cloth rent the air, echoing throughout the clearing. From the equipment pouches of the three masked men dozens of black blurs shot forth, all towards the three tantos of the men, leaving cuts in their clothes and on their skin as they took the most direct route to the tip-less steel blades, leaving small trickles of crimson liquid leaking down their skin. The black blurs met the unique tantos in a tremendous ching-clang of metal on metal, echoing loudly across the water and even down to the area at the bottom of the waterfall. When the momentum of the blurs was stopped by the tantos, it was revealed that the blurs were in fact every single kunai and shuriken on them, with each man having at least a couple dozen of each clinging to their tantos and each other, making them look like spiky clubs of black metal. Despite the unexpected result, there was no reaction of shock or surprise from the false Anbu. The metal has become magnetized. That is why the blades stopped moving, and similar pull as the tanto, while the shuriken have the opposite pull. Said the demon-masked one. Indeed, perhaps magnet release. Lord Danzo will surely be interested in this child, with both the Sharingan and magnet style. The cat-masked one added, receiving a nod from the others. It seems that non-lethal force will be required. The apparent leader commented. Just as well, metal weapons will be useless against the boy. He concluded. While the three were discerning what had happened, Naruto had entered a trance-like state. His eyes glassed over, and his face went completely blank. Just when the masked individuals finished their deductions, Naruto's right arm rose from his side in a manner eerily similar to that of a zombie, but without the groaning and decomposing flesh. The last thing the three Anbu look-alikes saw was him clenching his hand, before all they could see was black and silver slivers. The slivers attacked ferociously, leaving hundreds if not thousands of paper-thin cuts on the men. It was so painful, it even made the emotionally void root members, who had been trained to have a pain tolerance even greater than the already impressive level of most ninja, let loose screams of agony. Blood sprayed through the air from numerous cuts across their bodies, the heavy scent of iron filling the air as the crimson life-giving liquid splashed on the ground and all over Naruto's front. Their clothes were reduced to tatters, the men looked more like lumps of raw meat than humans. It was when the first warm spray of liquid hit his face, that Naruto came out of his trance. He looked in shock as he was showered in the blood of the three men who were now unrecognizable. For a moment, he was frozen in shock. He watched the bodies fall, and felt himself covered in the thick, warm crimson blood. Finally, the adrenaline began to leave, and his heart slowed down. He felt fatigue weighing him down, his limbs feeling like lead, and his eyelids drooping. Even in the exhausted fog, he managed to whisper a shocked question, Did I do that? Did I kill them? His eyelids began to feel like lead, and started to close. The crimson hue that had taken them over receded, and his normal electric blue color returned for a moment. Then his eyes closed. His body gave way to the fatigue. Slowly, he began to tip backwards, splashing down into the swift current just as he lost consciousness. The young boy didn't even register the freezing shock of the cold water embracing him. Upon hitting the water, his body sunk, slightly at first, but then bubbles erupting around it and water was thrown into the air, sparkling in the sunlight. He submerged for a moment, and then his body gently floated to the surface. With a low bloop, the boy surfaced, and ripples spread outwards from where he had landed. His wet hair was now sticking to his forehead, and his soaking clothes slightly weighed him down, barely keeping his face above the water. Soon though, his body began to be pulled towards the edge of the waterfall like a bug stuck in the water as a bathtub drains. At first his clothes slowed him down slightly, but as he got closer and closer to the edge, his speed and momentum increased, drawing him faster and faster towards his certain demise by being dashed upon the rocks at the bottom of the large waterfall. His clothes doing less and less to slow him. Finally he was pitched over the side of the fall at high speeds, spiraling down through the air end over end. His soaking clothes and wet hair were pulled back tight to his body, flapping loudly behind him from the force of his fall. He was getting closer and closer to being splattered upon the rocks and water below, nothing but a stain on the surface. It began to look hopeless as he approached midway down. He would be dashed upon the surface below, never awakening, never reaching his dreams or goals. Nobody would ever know what became of him. It was then, as he reached midway, that a black and white blur seemed to flash across the waterfall, snatching him from midair, and carrying him to a tree branch on the side of the cliff. Once it had stopped, the blur was revealed to be an extremely old man holding Naruto gently in his arms. He was definitely very old, older even than the third, and emaciated. His pale, wrinkly skin stretched over a body that was undoubtedly once toned and athletic, still possessing wiry muscle even as it had aged. His hair was very long, thin, and spiky, reaching his waist with a bang covering his right eye. He wore a simple black robe and simple straw sandals with waraji. Onyx eyes gazed down at the blonde intensely for a moment. The man examined him, as if searching for something in his features. He seemed to find it, and his eyes softened, a warm look entering the black pools. The man then whispered to the unconscious blonde. So I was correct. It is you, my grandson. It would seem you have inherited my unfortunate habit of getting into complicated situations. The old man whispered to himself and the blonde, before he disappeared in a swirl of leaves. NUC. Behind the curtain of white that was the waterfall along the Naka River, the mist from the cascading current was flung into the air. A constant roar filled the air in front of the rocky entrance. The waters from the upper portion of the river thundered down into the lower portion of the river. The waters at the entrance were churned into a constant white foam that floated downwards, and slowly dissipated in the crystal blue current. Beyond that majestic curtain, lay the entrance to a cave. And beyond that lay a long tunnel, that led back underneath the river. Even further beyond this, the tunnel led into a fairly large rocky cavern, lit by torches along the walls that gave the otherwise dark place a soft light. On one side, there was another waterfall, considerably smaller than the one outside, that fed into a large, clear, cool pool of water, with a traditional wooden bridge arching over it. Along the floor, interspersed here and there, were stalagmites pointing proud and tall into the air. Perhaps the most prominent landmark was the Japanese-style wooden house at the back of the cave. The front doors were a sliding style of door, and inside those doors, in the front room of the house, the cave's only occupant sat in a meditative pose, extending his senses around him. The occupant was a very old man, almost emaciated in appearance, with many wrinkles. His hair was slightly thin, long, and spiky, with one bang covering his right eye, and he wore a simple black robe. His name was Madara Uchiha, the former head of the Uchiha clan, and considered by many to be one of the worst traitors in Konoha's entire history. He was doing an exercise to maintain his sensing abilities, extending them around him to try and sense any signatures near him, or even far away. It was one of the few things he could do to keep his chakra skills sharp. It was as he was doing this, that he sensed something peculiar. 7 signatures doing battle along the Naka River. 6 of them chased after the 7th, throwing jutsu at the person. All of the individuals had at least Anbu-level reserves if he was sensing right, and one seemed to be an Uchiha, as he could sense the special chakra of the Sharingan being used. That was the one that was being attacked. Curious. But that wasn't all. Very near to them, and getting closer, seemed to be a signature slightly larger than those. After a moment the 8th signature suddenly began moving fastly in his direction, and 3 of the other signatures chasing the 7th broke off and began chasing the 8th. While they ran, the person's chakra seemed to be fluctuating, as if something was happening to them. Could it be a bloodline stirring? Curious. The chase lasted for a few minutes, until the 8th person was backed up against the river almost directly above him. It was as this happened, that whatever bloodline that had begun stirring finally awakened in the 8th person, and Madara's eyes opened in shock. There wasn't one bloodline awakening, but 2. And he recognized them both. Cold fingers seemed to be trailing down his spine, and a pit of worry formed in his stomach, as he recognized not only the chakra distinctive of the Sharingan, but another bloodline that was all too familiar. One he hadn't felt in years. Only one word passed through his mind, as his features hardened. Naruto, he thought, before he vanished in a blur of motion. NUC. Drip, drip, drip. Naruto's eyes scrunched up at the noise that invaded his ears, of water dripping down onto another watery surface. He felt tired, he didn't want to get up. Drip, drip. The noise continued, and his mind began to become more awake. The events that led to his unconsciousness came rushing back to him in rapid succession. His eyes snapped wide open in shock and fear, and he sat up abruptly, looking wildly around himself. The blonde couldn't help but be confused by his surroundings. He lay in the middle of a corridor that looked like the basement of an industrial plant, with metal pipes running along the walls and ceiling. The floor was flooded with a pool of water maybe a couple inches deep, but strangely enough he didn't feel his clothes were wet, or any dampness on his skin. The entire place seemed to be illuminated by a low golden light, leaving plenty of shadows dancing around him, and causing it to have an ethereal air to it. Slowly he began to get up on his feet, taking in more of the strange place, trying to get a clue as to where he was. The first thing he noticed was the fact that the air strangely enough wasn't stale like you would expect for the underground. From what he could tell, the corridor carried on for quite a ways, extending into the shadows. With nothing else to do, the boy began to walk down the hallway, hoping to find a way out this strange place. The blonde soon came to the end of the corridor, coming to a crossroads from another corridor. It was here that he came across his first significant finding in this strange place, as he saw a bright light sparkling in the distance. That's when he began to hear it, the faint whisper, of a rumbling, deep, gravelly voice. It emanated from the faint light at the end of the corridor. Come. The voice beckoned. Naruto was immediately on guard. The voice filled him with dread, a cold pit forming in his stomach. It sounded primal and ancient. Who's there? Where am I? Naruto called into the darkness of the corridor. Come to me. The voice called once more. Reluctantly, Naruto found himself continuing to walk down the corridor towards where the voice came from. Whatever it was knew he was here, so there was no point trying to hide or run. He became aware of a new noise entering his range of hearing. At first, he mistook it for the sound of wind passing through the corridor. Woo whoosh, woo whoosh, woo whoosh. On the sound went. Finally, he recognized it for what it was when he got far enough along the corridor. It was the sound of a giant pair of lungs pumping air in and out. A shiver of fear ran down his spine. How large did a creature have to be to produce such a noise simply by breathing? He wasn't sure he wanted to find out. Still, the blonde continued to walk through the corridor, noting that for some reason, his vision seemed much better than it usually was. He could see almost every detail of the corridor, even in the dark. Had he been able to see himself, he would have seen that his eyes glowed a bloody red in the darkness, one tomo adjacent to the pupil in each eye. He began to see a glow at the end of the corridor. Whatever lay beyond was significantly brighter than the corridor. It took him but moments to reach the end of the tunnel, and he was blinded briefly by the bright light, white spots blurring his vision and obscuring the room for a moment. Blinking furiously, the white spots began to disappear slowly from his vision, allowing him to view the room he was in. He was in a rather large room, with pipes all along the walls, and if he guessed right, most likely the ceiling, which couldn't be seen because it was so high up shadows obscured it. The object that held the blonde's attention the most though, was the giant golden gates that stood imposingly from floor to ceiling directly across from him, with a border around them with golden spiral designs. There appeared to be a large piece of paper, almost as big as his body, holding it shut, with the kanji for seal on it. Even with his strangely enhanced vision, he couldn't see what was inside. It was simply a sea of darkness, like no light could exist within it. The most disconcerting part was that he could tell the deep breaths were coming from within that vast darkness. He felt a wave of malice and hatred crash down upon him when he began to cross the room. The wave forced him to his knees, with his eyes bulging wide in fear. He couldn't stand, he couldn't talk, he could barely even breathe. It was 10 times worse than when he had felt the terror when he was about to be killed by the 3 masked men. The blonde felt himself breaking out in a cold sweat. The pressure increased to the point he couldn't even draw breath. He soon found himself struggling to stay conscious, black spots beginning to invade his vision. Finally, mercifully, the pressure lifted from him. A deep rumbling chuckle filled the room. Naruto collapsed forward onto his hands and knees, panting with eyes still wide in shock and fear. Suddenly, that same voice from before boomed out to him. Hey, so, my warden has finally come before me. The voice called out. A visibly shaken Naruto got to his feet slowly. He looked directly into the darkness. Right now he stood just a short distance away from the cage. All he wanted to do was turn and flee in terror. The boy shook his head. He attempted to rein in his fear, managing to shift his facial features from being terrified with wide eyes, to simply one of wariness. Who are you? He asked cautiously. In response, he received another deep chuckle, before something terrifying happened. In the dark abyss inside the cage, two enormous crimson eyes with slit pupils shot open, with a huge gleaming white grin soon following, the large pointed teeth as big as Naruto himself. Naruto took a step back in fear, at the bloodthirsty grin and the almost manic glaring eyes, just as an reddish-orange paw that resembled a human-like hand shot forward towards him, gleaming white claws looking to impale him. The boy saw it coming in slow motion, and threw himself backwards, landing on his rear in the pool of water on the floor. Still, the claws continued to come towards him, and were just about to impale him when... Clang! With a resounding crash, the paw was stopped as it crashed against the bars of the cage, stopping one of the claws just inches from Naruto's face. If the blonde hadn't thrown himself backwards, he would have been impaled on the claw. Looking up at the owner of the paw with eyes wide in shock, Naruto gulped in fear, as he saw a vision of terror. The shadows in the cage crawled backwards to reveal a beast of nightmares. Standing there looking at him with a menacing grin and one paw attempting to impale him, was a giant reddish-orange fox with a human-like torso and rabbit-like ears, with black marks extending from its eyes into the inside of its ears. Behind it waved 9 giant tails that seemed to have a mind of their own. He was standing in front of the Kyuubi no Yoko. The greatest calamity to ever befall Konoha. Of course, it's just my luck that you two have an ability that will help you control me. To think, you are from that accursed clan. The fox growled. For his part, Naruto was frozen in shock and fear. It felt like someone had poured ice water into his veins. It took several moments for him to register what the fox said, and formulate a reply. Why, you're the Kyuubi. Where are we, and what's this about control, and a clan? Naruto asked, shaky at first, but stronger and more confused at the end. In response, the Kyuubi removed its claw from the cage door, laying down and growling at the boy. Don't play dumb with me, boy, you are undoubtedly a member of those accursed Uchiha, with that repugnant Sharingan. Kyuubi bellowed. The blonde was frozen in shock. He tried to process the Kyuubi's words, but they were just too absurd. Still in denial, he looked down into the pool of water at his feet, only to see his reflection staring back at him, his eyes a glowing bloody crimson, with a single black tomo spinning around the pupil in each eye. The Sharingan, but how? Naruto whispered to himself in complete shock. Nuc. Madara Uchiha had lived a very long life. He had lived longer than even the third Hokage or third Tsuchikage had. Over that time, he had seen and done many things, many of which he was not proud of. Twice, he had fallen into the curse of hatred that plagued his clan. Twice he had turned his back on his best friend, a man who believed in him when nobody else did, and thrown their friendship away. And twice he had been pulled from that hatred, once by his friend, and once by the woman he loved. He had fought in endless battles, founded, alongside Hashirama, the first ever hidden village, where ninja clans that previously would have been at war could live together in peace, turned his back on that village to pursue a mad plan to bring a world where no one had to be a loser. Looking upon the sleeping face of his grandson, reminding him so much of his son, he felt the weight of his years pressing on him more than ever. They were currently in a rather simple room with wood paneling on the walls, ceiling, and floor. A simple bed with a wooden frame stood in the corner, and a chandelier filled with candles hung from the ceiling, bathing the room in a warm yellow light. Naruto was tucked under the covers, still unconscious from his ordeal and, Madara suspected, interacting with the Kyuubi. In the ancient Uchiha's opinion, that was a good thing, because the sooner he got to know the fox, the sooner he could learn to use its power. Looking at his grandson, Madara felt the warm content feeling of love suffusing his being, a feeling he hadn't felt since he had lived happily with his wife and son, before she died and his son went missing. His grandson was now the only family he had, and because of his foolish hatred, he was in danger, and it was up to the elderly Uchiha to prepare him to face it when it came. But right now, there were things he needed to do. With a weary sigh, the Uchiha turned and began to walk out of the room. I had best dispose of what's left of the bodies, before anyone finds them. NUC. The blonde, Uzumaki, stared into the water below him, and more specifically at the pair of bloody vermilion eyes staring back at him. His eyes were wide in astonishment, and he could feel his body shaking. Such was the shock of seeing the famous dojutsu of the Uchiha clan in his eyes. Naruto had seen Uchiha clan members around the village, he'd even seen the Sharingan before. But he had never expected to see it in his own eyes. How was it possible? He had thought he was just an orphan, some kid that everyone seemed to hate for a reason he couldn't grasp. How's this possible? I'm no Uchiha, Naruto asked, stated to himself in shock, something the Kyuubi heard. The beast couldn't withhold a snort of derision, the noise echoing off the walls. Obviously you are, little boy. There's no doubt that is the Sharingan. The Kyuubi growled, causing Naruto to look up at it more. It snarled in fury when Naruto met its eyes. Turn those infernal things off, before I find a way to rip them from your skull, and make jam from them, to spread on crackers. The fox snarled in annoyance, its tails whipping about in agitation. Naruto gulped in fear. How do I do that? He asked nervously, not wanting to upset it. Lucky for him, the fox simply gave a derisive growl, before answering. You certainly don't act like most of your clan. To turn those stupid things off, you need to stop the chakra flowing in your eyes, whelp. It replied in a huff. Still slightly confused, Naruto struggled to control his chakra, willing the chakra in his eyes to halt. He found it difficult. Out of all of the students in his class, he was the worst at chakra control. It was with much relief that he looked down into the water, to see his normal blue eyes looking back at him. Shakily, he looked back up at the Kyuubi, still having questions for the ancient entity. Like where the heck they were, and what the beast was doing there. For a few minutes, everything was silent, until he finally worked up the nerve to speak to the being once more, choosing his words carefully so as not to upset it. I don't wanna be disrespectful, but where are we? And what did you mean when you called me your warden? More importantly, how are you here? All the stories say the fourth killed you. Naruto asked cautiously. As soon as the last sentence left his mouth, Naruto knew he touched a nerve. Instantly the fox once more tried to impale him, slamming its hand-like paw into the bars again. It snarled in fury, trying in vain to get to the blonde. Kill me. The great Kyuubi no Yoko killed by a lowly human. Kyuubi roared in fury, causing the boy to cower slightly from the sheer might of its rage. Even though the fourth was his hero, he daren't try to talk back to the chakra being. After a moment, the fox seemed to regain its composure, but with the malicious snarl still in place. When next it spoke, it was much calmer, with a touch of arrogance. Please, that whelp barely managed to seal me away with the help of that pathetic woman. The mere notion of him being able to kill me is laughable. The fox told him. As opposed to the previous statements, this one drew curiosity from the blonde. What did it mean, a woman? All the stories he heard said the fourth beat the Kyuubi alone. And what was this business about sealing? He didn't know much about sealing, only what the third had told him, but if the Kyuubi was sealed in something, there was no way he should be able to be face to face with it. If you're sealed away, how can I be talking to you? How'd I get in a seal? He asked. To his surprise, the chakra entity seemed to find this amusing. Its dark chuckles filled the boiler room, as it replied with a malicious smirk. Foolish little boy, I called you my warden, are you too stupid to realize what those two things mean? The fox taunted. The reason you are my warden, and the reason you can be, the very reason you are shunned by the people of your village, is because your beloved fourth sealed me inside of you. said Kyubi with a twisted grin. It seemed that the fox took a twisted glee in its container's pain. Naruto's eyes widened in shock, as the booming echoes of the Kyubi's hate-filled mirth reverberated through the room and through his body. It made horrifying sense. The reason everyone ignored him or glared at him. Why, when he would describe people that were particularly mean to him to his grandfather figure, they would disappear. All because he had the Kyubi sealed in him the day he was born, by his hero no less. It took him several minutes to recover his faculties. He struggled to come to terms with all the life-altering occurrences he had recently experienced. He had learned he had the Sharingan, made his first kill, and learned he was the jailer to a massive chakra monster, all in one day. It was surprising he wasn't exhausted, but since it was his mind, it was slightly understandable. Naruto gazed at the reflection of himself in the water. He became curious. Once more he allowed chakra into his eyes. It was fascinating to see the normally electric blue eyes bleed into crimson red, the black tomo spinning slowly. Before he could get too into looking at his new eyes, he found himself interrupted by a deep growl from the occupant of the cage. "Why are you playing with those, boy? I told you to keep them off." It growled in annoyance. Instead of being cowed as he was earlier, the blonde decided to keep them on, something that seemed to annoy the fox as the boy decided to look at him with them. "I have them now, so I might as well get used to them. Gramps says there's nothing more foolish than wielding a weapon you don't know how to use," he replied. Naruto was beginning to get curious as to why the fox seemed to loathe the eyes. "Why do you hate the Sharingan so much?" Naruto asked in a respectful tone, trying to not upset the entity. It was locked in a cage, but Naruto didn't want to press his luck and make the Kyubi angry. At first it seemed like the fox would refuse to answer, as the silence stretched for near a minute. Finally, it was broken with an resigned huff from the monster. "Those filthy monkey eyes have been used to control me twice by members of your damned clan," it answered. This was something Naruto found interesting. It explained what it had meant when it had said he had an ability with the potential to control it. He was going to question it further, but it seemed the fox was now feeling talkative, continuing without the need of prodding. "It makes my blood boil seeing you looking at me with them. They remind me of that man." The fox growled. It narrowed its eyes, focusing harder on the blonde. "In fact, if you had black hair, you would be the spitting image of him if he was a boy," it said with a menacing snarl. Naruto didn't know what to make of that. He reminded the Kyubi of one of the men that had controlled it. But who could that be? He began, halting as he began feeling a strange sensation. It felt like he was being pulled from his spot, yet not in any direction. His form began fading. Naruto looked around himself in worry. "What's happening?" he asked in a panicked tone. Seeing the panic, the fox snorted in amusement, resting its head in its palm in a bored fashion. "Oh, settle down, foolish boy. Your body is simply awakening from its forced nap, after you butchered those 3 men. I must say, it was a most impressive display for one so small." The fox chuckled, seeming to find amusement in the way the 3 men had died. Naruto froze as he was reminded of his recent kills, slowly fading from the seal with a shocked look. "Nuc. Ah!" Naruto groaned loudly, from his prone position in the bed. Wait. Bed. Last thing he knew, he was falling into a river. With a jolt, his eyes snapped wide, and he sat up from his position, throwing the covers off the upper part of his body as he did so. Many questions filled his mind. How did he get here? Where was here? His head turned from side to side, as if it was on a swivel. Eyes blazing with the Sharingan, he caught every detail of the room around him. The searching stopped when his gaze landed on a very old man sitting next to the bed he laid in, looking at him with amusement. "It would seem you took quite the fall, my boy. If I hadn't arrived in time, you would undoubtedly be dead," the man said, a glint of something Naruto couldn't quite place flashing through his eyes. Before Naruto could even think to reply, He winced as he suddenly heard the voice of the Kyuubi roaring loudly inside his head. Madara, let me out so I can kill him. The outburst caused a headache for Naruto. He could practically see the Kyuubi slamming itself against its cage, trying to get out to get this man it apparently knew. Surprisingly, it seemed the man seemed to be aware of this. Ah, I suppose the Kyuubi is giving you trouble. Understandable, considering our history. That was it. Who the hell was this Madara guy? The name sounded familiar, but he couldn't quite place it. He was almost certain that his Gramps had mentioned it in one of his stories. Who the hell are you? Why does the Kyuubi wanna get you so bad? How do you even know about it? And where the heck are we? Naruto asked in slightly irritated tone. It seemed like the entire day he had been out of the know. First, he planned on going to train, only to have people try to kill him. Then he had fallen into a river, and gone unconscious, meeting the Kyuubi and learning he was not only the apparent Jinchuriki of said beast, but that he possessed the Sharingan. Finally, he now woke up and found himself in an unknown place, with an unknown man, that the Kyuubi seemed to hate, sitting near him. Needless to say, he was tired of the word, unknown. The man seemed to consider his question, his expression becoming much more serious. Well, in reverse order. We are in a hidden base of mine behind the waterfall you fell over. The Kyuubi hates me because I am one of only 2 men to control it with the Sharingan, and, as to who I am, he said, pausing as he closed his eyes, allowing Naruto's own to widen in shock, the Sharingan still spinning. This was one of the men that had controlled the Kyuubi. Was he the one that Kyuubi said he reminded him of? After a moment, the man's eyes snapped open, a fully matured Sharingan spinning to life in his eyes, as he looked at Naruto. I am Madara Uchiha, and I am your grandfather. The blonde Uchiha stared with shocked Sharingan eyes at the old man in front of him. His body was frozen in shock at the bombshell Madara had just hit him with. The breath seemed to be driven from his body, like someone just hit him in the stomach with a sledgehammer. Did he just hear him right? Did the old man just claim to be his grandfather? It seemed completely ridiculous. After all, what were the chances that he would fall off a waterfall that his long-lost grandfather lived behind? Things like that just didn't happen. The claim was plain ludicrous. But there was one thing that made his claim believable. The Sharingan. Naruto couldn't help but remember how the Kyuubi said he reminded it of one of the men that controlled it, that he looked like him. Could it really be true? Could he really be my grandfather? Thought Naruto to himself uncertainly. If it was true, Naruto had a lot of questions for the man. First and foremost being where he had been his entire life. Still slightly skeptical, Naruto decided to at least see what he had to say. The man did save him from falling to his death after all. I'm not saying I believe you, but say it is true, that you are my grandfather. Where have you been all my life? Asked Naruto cautiously, deactivating his Sharingan to stop the drain on his chakra. The elder Uchiha sighed at his question, looking much older than his already very advanced age. The white-haired man looked down, his onyx eyes vacant as he became engrossed in his inner thoughts. I can assure you, I am your grandfather, said Madara. As for where I have been all your life, that is a long story, and one full of many mistakes I have regretted. Naruto simply looked at him with his eyes full of determination. Clearly he wouldn't be giving up until he had answers. Very well. To understand the reason I have not been there, you must first know the story of my life after I left Konoha nearly 40 years ago, on the day I met your grandmother in the deserts of the Land of Wind. Began Madara, his mind becoming lost in the past 45 years ago. NUC. 39 years ago. Madara's feet padded softly across the desert. He wore a black cloak over his usual armor, which produced a constant clanking sound, with the hood up to cast a shadow over his eyes, and his war fan strapped to his back. Around him a howling wind whipped up the sands of the desert, creating an opaque cloud that blocked off visibility just a few meters in front of him. But he paid no heed to it, or the sand that rubbed against his skin, scrubbing it raw. It had been 23 years since his fight with Hashirama at the place that had afterwards been dubbed the Valley of the End. Since then, he had spent his time making preparations for the Eye of the Moon plan. After awakening the Rinnegan, he had summoned the statue he had dubbed the Ghetto statue, and created a clone of Hashirama, along with a strange type of creature that grew from the same tree as the clone that called themselves Zetsu. The sound of his cloak flapping around filled his ears, as he made his way across the deserts of the Land of Wind. He was here to scout Sunagakur, the village that possessed the Aikibi no Shukaku. Before he began collecting the Biju, he had to plan out every little detail, like where he would extract them, which would require he find places to serve as temporary bases in all the nations that had Jinchuriki. His first stop was naturally the village who not only had the weakest Biju, but was probably the weakest of the Great Five in military strength. For half the day he walked, heedless of the heat beating down on his neck, or the wind that carried sand with it, rubbing his skin raw. He simply carried onward at a steady pace. It wasn't until he was only a few hours from the walls of Suna, that anything out of the ordinary happened. Through his sensing skills, he sensed a rather impressive chakra signature, nowhere near his or Hashirama's, but definitely impressive. It even had an especially unique feel, like the person possessed a bloodline, one he hadn't encountered before. Whoever it was, they were headed towards Suna from the border with Ishigakure. They were also heading into a trap, because only a mile in front of them, 12 other signatures were in positions that suggested they were poised to close ranks and surround the person. It wasn't hard to discover the reason for the supposed ambush. Although it had begun to wind down, the Shinobi World War was still going on, and although uncommon, since much of the fighting was being done in smaller countries, incursions between the Great Five hidden villages happened. It was the strongest signature of the ambush group that gave him a clue as to what village the two sides were on. He recognized it as one identical to a boy from Iwa he had encountered over 20 years ago in one of his diplomatic visits to the Land of Earth. Madara spared him to see how strong he would be when he reached his potential, in hopes he might give him a good dance. If he's here, the group is from. Madara mused. No doubt that means that the other is from Suna, with their recent skirmishes. The former clan held almost felt a grin tug at his lips. Perhaps the explosion-style user has learned to dance better since last we met. It had been a long time since he had actually fought, and the possibility of a good fight had his blood practically boiling in anticipation. The fact that this could possibly get him an asset in scouting Suna if he played his cards right, was just a bonus. The wind brushed his black and gray bangs out of his right eye, his onyx gaze changed to a glowing red, with 3 tomo spinning around each in a menacing fashion. Savage grin in place, he disappeared in a burst of speed, looking forward to the fight to come. NUC. Kazuhana ran across the desert at a rapid pace. Small gouts of sand flew up behind her, as she dashed with her body bent forward and arms trailing behind her. The sun beat down upon the back of her neck, which was covered by a tan scarf wound around her neck and shoulders. The slender kunoichi had a surprisingly innocent appearance, with shoulder-length, blonde hair which framed her kind-looking face, and blue eyes. She wore a simple outfit, which did well at disguising her slightly buxom feminine figure, along with a long, silver-white, windflower light silk scarf draped loosely around her neck. Keeping her bangs back from her forehead was her black-clothed headband. A soft sigh escaped her lips. She was on her way back from yet another mission to try and sabotage Iwa's war efforts, something her magnet-release Kekkei Genkei made her especially equipped for, since she could turn their weapons against them, or even break them down into particles of powder. She was honestly tired of the war, and fighting in general. At 34 years old, she was considering retiring. She had had a very successful career, gaining the rank of Jonin and becoming one of the strongest kunoichi in the village. But now, all she really wanted to do was to settle down and start a family, and watch proudly as her younger brother Fukuro attained his dream of being Kazekage, something he was being groomed for due to his innovation of their bloodline to mimic the abilities of Shukaku's Jinchuriki. Sigh. I think I'll bring it up with Lord Kazekage and Fukuro once I get back. It wasn't really that hard of a decision for her, the only reason it hadn't been made sooner was because her village needed her. In truth, she never really liked fighting, but it was necessary to protect her village and brother. Now, with him having far surpassed her, she could rest easy in retiring, knowing the village was in good hands. Whether it was her distracting thoughts, or premature relaxation from being in the land of wind again, Kazuhana was snapped from her musings when she was suddenly put on edge. Her senses went into overdrive as she felt chakra signatures appearing around her. They were moving to completely surround her, and she had no time to avoid it. Damn it! It's too late to escape. She cursed as she realized she had walked straight into a trap. Her sapphire gaze lost its usual kind quality, being replaced by a fierce concentration as she examined the shinobi surrounding her. Involuntarily, her blood ran cold when she saw the single-sleeved red uniforms and the brown armor. She was surrounded by no less than a dozen Iwagakure Jonin-level ninja. The one that caused the most dread stood directly in front of her with a grim expression. The man had spiky, light brown hair and prominent jaw lines, and green eyes that showed the coolness of an experienced shinobi. He wore the standard Iwa uniform, with his right arm exposed save for his headband. He was tall, with an athletic build. His expression showed that, while he was resolved, he had regrets about his mission. She recognized him easily. He was Gari of the Explosion Release, head of the Explosion Corps. Alone she stood a good chance, but with 11 other Jonin with him, she stood almost none. The kunoichi ruthlessly squashed down on the sorrow that threatened to rear its head, at what was to come. She was a proud member of Suna, and she wouldn't die crying like a helpless girl. After a few minutes of a silent stare-off between her and Gari, the man finally spoke. I'm afraid that you won't be making it back to your village, Kazuhana-san. He told her. The Tsuchikage has decided your brother is becoming too much of a threat, he wants him to be unbalanced so it will be easier to take him down. The man paused, sighing before continuing. Therefore, we've been ordered to eliminate you, thus removing two of the biggest threats from your village. At first, her heart had sunk upon hearing that they were indeed here to kill her. When she heard it was part of a plan to kill her baby brother, a white-hot rage filled her. She had helped raise him after their parents were killed, he was the only family she had, and they wanted to take him away from her. Her arms rose up slowly. A scraping and clanking sound filled the air. Hundreds of kunai and shuriken began pouring out of the sleeves of her shirt. Puffs of smoke issued from various places on her clothing as even more weapons, including sei, chakram, blade staffs, and various other unique blades, rose into the air. The weapons coalesced into a sphere of sharp pointy objects surrounding her from all sides, and even above her. Trying to kill me is one thing, but I won't let you lay a finger on my little brother. She declared fiercely. She prepared to launch her weapons at them and shred them to pieces. Most of the men surrounding her were wary of the intimidating wall of weapons. They arranged themselves into rows with a creepy sort of inanimate synchronization. Magnet style. Thousand blade dance. She cried as the spinning reached a fever pitch. A giant, bzzzzzzzzz, sound filled the air, as if many giant fans were blowing around her. Just when it appeared the blades were about to suddenly expand outwards, all motion abruptly ceased. Silence dominated for a second, save for the wind and the shifting sand. All at once, the blades began to fall, a tremendous and continuous clanging filling the air as they landed on top of each other. It threw up a cloud of sand that obscured Kazuhana from view. When the cloud of grit began settling, it revealed a large seal array underneath Kazuhana, glowing and pulsing with a faint blue light, drawing a pinkish-purple chakra from the weapons. The woman was left stunned in the field of weapons, mouth agape in shock. What's happening? My magnet release, it's not working. She gasped in horror. Her strongest abilities were out of reach. She was doomed. Lord Tsuchikage gave me a special seal designed to use to nullify your magnetic chakra for a small period of time. It's not versatile or powerful enough to be useful against someone like you, brother, but against you, explained Gari, his expression grim as ever. The man showed no sign of gloating over having outplayed her, seemingly resigned to carry out his mission. One of the Jonin surrounding her decided to speak up, his voice nervous as he did. Shouldn't we get this over with, Yano, before it stops working and she can use her Kekkei Genkai again? He asked. His fellow Jonin nodded their agreement. Gari sighed, nodding and giving his assent to attack. Kazuhana's heart sank. This was it. This was really it. Her only chance of victory had been stripped from her. She would die here, in this lonely desert. She thought of her brother, waiting for her to return so that they could celebrate his transition to Cage. He would be all alone now. Tears welled in her eyes. Fukuro, I don't want to leave him alone. Please, someone, anyone help. She prayed. A tear slipped down her cheek. Seconds ticked by, and nothing happened save for the Iowa ninja drawing weapons, kunai, and swords in some cases. The Jonin began to charge at her, and still there was no answer. Just as Kazuhana had begun to lose all hope, and say her goodbyes, a miracle happened. Out of nowhere, a massive killing intent slammed down on everyone. It was so great, it made Kazuhana's knees shake. She couldn't even imagine what it was doing to the Iowa ninja, who it seemed to be focused on. She could hear the rasps as they struggled to draw breath, and see the trembling as they fought to stay standing. A small hope began to form within her. Could this be someone here to help? Her eyes darted around, trying to find whoever was producing this killing intent. Finally, she locked onto a man standing atop one of the dunes. She could tell from the height it was a man, clad in a black cloak with a large gunbai strapped to his back. Kazuhana couldn't see much else of him, due to the harsh sunlight. The only thing she could make out of the stranger was a pair of glowing red eyes, glaring at the Iowa ninja. The mysterious stranger spoke in a cold voice, I hope you don't mind, but I saw you dancing, and decided to cut in. Kazuhana witnessed the blood draining from Gari's face. Did he know this stranger somehow? If he did, the person filled him with dread. It can't be, you're supposed to be dead, what are you doing here? He asked shakily. She got the sense that the man on the dune was smirking, when he spoke to Gari. You've grown up since last we met face to face. Tell me, how far have your skills come? He asked, not seeming truly concerned with getting an answer. I hope that this time, outdance will be much more entertaining. The fodder should spice things up. Kazuhana felt conflicted. The tone in his voice when the man spoke of the fodder was slightly abhorrent. At the same time, the man was saving her. She couldn't help but feel grateful that he would be taking them on for her. Who is he, Gari? Asked one of the Jonin. All 11 discreetly began getting their hands in position to begin jutsu. Madara. The whispered name fell from his lips like lead, but all the Iowa ninja heard it, and they began to tremble in fear. Kazuhana was puzzled, but she took it as a good sign that the Iowa ninja seemed to fear him. Perhaps I won't have to join mother and father after all, she thought hopefully. Nuc. Madara couldn't help the bloodthirsty smile on his face, as he looked down at the men below him. They clearly knew who he was, and feared him. Retreat. Retreat now. Gari hissed to his men, causing them to begin to scatter. The retreat was halted. Madara smirked, sped towards one of the men in the back. He appeared from a burst of speed, his gunbai extended backwards to come down on the man. The man raised his arms too black. Madara knew it was useless. He channeled wind chakra around the fan, and cleanly bisected him. His body dropped to the ground with a wet thump. The sand beneath him was stained crimson, his organs spilled out onto the ground. Tisk tisk, how rude, leaving before I have my dance. said Madara, with a mock disappointed frown. He strode forward with a methodical gait, stopping to stand in between Kazuhana and Gari. Madara felt his pulse quickening. It had been a long time since he felt the rush of battle, his own unimaginable power coursing through him. He could see everything the Iwa ninja were about to do, the power of his Sharingan. A chill wind swept across the desert, blowing his bangs to the side. He and the Iwa ninjas both tensed in preparation for the fight to come. Now, even sparing her a glance, Madara spoke to the woman they had been about to kill. "Leave, woman. I will take them from here," he told her bluntly. Madara saw her hesitate, and then dart off in the direction of her village. Once she was a good distance away, a savage grin stole across his face. He leered at his opponents bloodthirstily. "Shall we begin?" The Iwa ninja sprang into action as one. They performed jutsu in tandem, trying to overpower him. "Good luck with that," he remarked snidely. "Earth style. Falling earth spears." Four of the ninja called, as spikes of earth grew from the ground, quickly firing upon Madara from all sides. At the exact same moment, another group of four completed hand seals of their own. Earth style. Earth dragon. Four large dragons made of rock rose up from the ground, going into the air higher and higher, until they finally began to descend towards Madara, blocking escape from above. The Uchiha couldn't help but scoff at the attempts to take him down. His Sharingan began to spin rapidly, morphing into a new shape, the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Three enlarged tomo with circles at the end joined into a circle with a red shuriken shape in the center, and three bars spreading outwards from the tomo. The attacks hit at the exact same time. The sound of earth shattering and rocks grinding filling the air. A large cloud of dust obscured the impact site. Dirt fell to the ground in showers. Madara grinned from within the cloud, a glowing blue ribcage surrounding him. He took pleasure in the terrified faces of the Iwa ninja, when the dust cleared and they could see him once more. "An impressive display," he complimented, though his next words caused the men to freeze. "But did you really think to fool me with such an obvious trick?" The ribcage rapidly began to grow, its skeletal structure expanding to be the head and torso of an skeletal-like figure, surrounded by a blazing blue aura. The arms quickly swung outwards, slamming into the Iwa shinobi and sending them all flying. The bodies collapsed into piles of mud upon impact, revealing themselves to be Earth-release shadow clones. It was a moment before the first Jonin made a move. He emerged from the ground behind Madara, to attempt to stab him in the back of the neck. Madara sidestepped the swing, and snatched the man by the throat with a single hand. For a moment he stared into the terrified eyes of the man. His hands scrabbled at Madara's desperately, and the man rasped for air. Madara squeezed hard, and jerked his hand viciously to the side. A resounding and gruesome crack filled the air, like a dead tree branch snapping. Madara released his grip, the Jonin collapsing lifelessly to the ground with his neck twisted at an odd angle. He let out a slight growl. Why did people have to act like rats? Madara had been hoping to at least break a sweat. Apparently that wouldn't be happening. "I don't have much patience for hide and seek," stated Madara. He placed his hands together, performing a series of 3 hand seals in such rapid succession his hands were barely even blurs. Showers of sand erupted around him. Out of one, came Gari, who cursed as he dodged a wooden spike emerging from a clone of Madara. His fellows weren't so lucky. They were impaled upon the spikes of other clones, each lifted into the air in a macabre display of might. Madara kept his eyes on the sole survivor. He performed a hand seal, which caused the clones to revert to roots and rejoin with his body. The corpses were left to tumble lifelessly to the ground. "Impressive, you managed to sense my clones in time to avoid them. Perhaps you can provide a better dance this time," Madara told the shocked ninja with a mocking smile. He saw a spark of anger in Gari's eyes, when he looked at the corpses of his comrades. "Let's just get this over with." Gari grunted. Madara saw him begin to gather red energy around his hands. Explosion style. Double Gatling ray. He called. Rapid fire. Thin beams of energy began firing at Madara. Whenever they made contact with something, the beams would violently explode, sending showers of sand up into the air all around Madara. Despite this, the Uchiha dodged all the beams with relative ease. "You will have to do better than that if you wish to live long," stated Madara as the beams rained down around him. Gari's firing pace increased, but Madara was still able to dodge them easily. He couldn't help but feel a bit disappointed. Was this all the brat had? The beams suddenly ceased, leaving Madara in the center of a dust cloud. Does he think he hit me? He got his answer when another explosion, this one much larger, sounded. Dust kicked up around him into an even larger cloud. Within the cloud, Madara remained stoic, as he squinted into the cloud of sand, tracking Gari's signature, not even flinching when the hood of his cloak was blown back off his head. He spotted 4 clones emerging around him, boxing him in with red energy glowing in their hands. As one, they launched their attacks at the same time Gari loosed his massive one. Explosion style. Landmine fist. They called in unison. From all of the clones' palms, a wave of explosive red energy surged forth, quickly engulfing the Uchiha in a blinding light. Above, Gari's voice cried out. Explosion style. Giant landmine fist. A massive thunderous explosion rocked that area of the desert. A miniature earthquake occurring as a massive cloud of sand was blasted into the air, filling the sky with a tidal wave of grit even as the light from the energy of the techniques created a tremendous white dome. The dome was slow to dissipate, but when it did, a fog of dust larger than any of the ones before it billowed in the air. The flapping of Gari's clothes as he fell, was the only sound that was made in the wake of the blast. Suddenly, from within the cloud, a giant blue sword emerged and bisected Gari from crotch to chin. His organs spilled out in a gory display of brutality. When the dust settled, his body lay a half-dozen yards in front of Madara. Madara was enveloped in a massive ogre-like figure made of cobalt chakra, with 2 faces and 4 arms. The chakra dissipated, and left him alone in the crater. As it faded and his eyes returned to their usual onyx state, Madara looked over at Gari's mangled corpse. "You indeed reached your potential. To force me to use Susanoo to avoid injury, most impressive." "I enjoyed this dance," said Madara. He turned on his heel, and locked eyes with a pair of shocked sapphire orbs. Madara clicked his tongue in annoyance. It was the woman from earlier. She gaped at him from the edge of the crater, her eyes wide as saucers. "So you came back. I thought I told you to leave," Madara stated bluntly. He began to walk towards her from the bottom of the crater. "Nuc. Kazuhana panted. She paused in her flight from the would-be ambush. Her heart still beat madly from the adrenaline, and a light sweat covered her skin. Slowly, she began to calm down from the near-death experience. Her mind drifted to her rescuer. When she thought she was about to be killed, he had stepped in and helped, allowing her to survive and return to her family and village. She felt guilty about leaving him alone. No matter how confident he had sounded, it was hard to fathom that he could handle them all on his own. The blonde bit her lip in worry. Eventually, she simply gave an exasperated sigh. She couldn't simply continue on, and ignore what he had done for her. She at least had to make sure he was okay. Turning back the way she came, Kazuhana began to dash across the sand once more. She practically flew across the desert, trying to get to the site of the ambush in time to help her savior. Almost halfway to the location of the ambush, a massive explosion went off, causing a slight tremor even from the distance she was at, and sending up a wave of sand that threatened to block out the sun. As the shadow of the towering cloud fell over her, Kazuhana redoubled her pace, worried about the well-being of the man that had helped her. It took but a few minutes for her to reach the area where the ambush site had been, and the sand had begun settling by then, only being a slight haze now. Where once there was flat desert, she stood on the edge of a large crater, looking down at the man that had saved her, as a massive ogre-like construct of cobalt chakra dissipated from around him. Besides some singing on his clothes, the man seemed to not have a scratch on him. Seeming to sense her, he looked up and locked eyes with her. His onyx eyes met her wide sapphire ones. Awe and a slight amount of fear filled her being as she looked upon the intense black eyes, framed by his blue-tinted black hair with strips of steel gray here and there. "So you came back. I thought I told you to leave," the man stated bluntly, causing her to wince slightly at the emotionless tone. It was impossible to tell whether he was angry or not. With a gulp to steady her nerves, she answered the unasked question. "I was worried you'd have trouble with them, so I decided to come back," she stated, her eyes showing her sincerity. "Are you hurt? That was a big explosion just now," asked Kazuhana. The man cocked his head to the side in confusion. He looked at her strangely. "Tell me, what is your name, and why were they attempting to kill you?" he asked. He had finally made it up the side of the crater, to stand in front of her. Kazuhana hesitated at the reminder of the attempt on her life. More importantly, the reason behind it. "My name is Kazuhana, I'm a Jonin of Suna. They were trying to kill me so that my brother would be emotionally vulnerable, and easier to kill," she said. Madara's eyebrow rose. "You see, he's being groomed to be Cage, so killing him would be a huge blow," elaborated Kazuhana with a grim expression, getting a nod of understanding from Madara. However, the grim mood only lasted for a few moments, before she seemed to brighten up. Kazuhana looked at him curiously. She hadn't encountered anyone that looked quite like him in the Land of Wind. It was especially odd to see someone with black hair there. "Anyways, who are you? I'd like to know my savior's name," she asked with a kind smile. "My name is Madara," Madara replied. Kazuhana shifted a little uncomfortably under his scrutinizing gaze. She felt like those black eyes were peering into her soul. Was that interest she saw in his? "Tell me, Kazuhana-san, you seem rather kind to be a ninja. Why did you choose to be one?" he asked, a slight curiosity in his tone. Kazuhana blushed slightly in embarrassment at the question. Of course, that was what he was interested in. It was one she had been asked many times, because her innocent appearance and kind demeanor seemed to be inconsistent with what was required of a kunoichi. This was highlighted by her dislike of fighting. Shuffling her feet uncomfortably, she explained to him. "Well, my parents died when my brother and I were still young, killed by enemy ninja," she began. "After that, I decided to become a ninja, so I could protect my little brother, and well, here I am, one of the strongest kunoichi in our village," explained Kazuhana. She looked at him intensely, a sudden strength in her eyes that belied her innocent appearance. "You see, I believe that you are only truly powerful when you have someone you love and want to protect. It pushes you to work just that little bit harder to gain the power, for their sake. Do you have anyone like that?" she responded, her expression very sincere. A melancholy look flashed across Madara's face. Though it didn't last long, Kazuhana could still see the sadness in his eyes. She almost gasped. She could recognize that look anywhere. It spoke of a tragic past, and someone who had lost someone dear. She had seen it in her own eyes for some time after her parents' death. "I did once, long ago. But that is no more," he told her. If he was feeling any sort of emotion, Madara concealed it very well. "You are an interesting one, perhaps we will meet again," stated Madara. He began walking in the direction that Kazuhana recognized as a circuitous route to Suna. Before he had gotten more than 10 feet, she called out to him. "I hope we do, and I hope you can find someone to protect once again, Madara-san," the Suna kunoichi told him, eyes shining kindly as she looked at his back. She heard him reply, his voice so quiet you could barely distinguish it from the whispering of the wind. Kazuhana wondered if it was her imagination, but it sounded like he said, "A new person to protect and love, perhaps." NUC. Present. Madara's eyes shone with unshed tears, as he remembered his very first encounter with his late wife. She had done so much for him, pulling him from the darkness and into the light, giving him a new purpose. Your grandmother was a great woman. I was a very different man at the time we met, consumed by hatred, and on my way down a dark path. She had the unique ability to change people for the better, and she certainly did it for me. It's because of her that I have never fallen to that hate again. I could never face her if I were to do so," said Madara, looking at his grandson. He saw a lot of his late wife in the young child. "So what happened after you met her?" Madara sighed, once more immersing himself in memories of the past. "For a time, we were happy. We eventually married, and not too long after, your father was born. But soon after, things changed. One day, your grandmother took your father to a carnival nearby. On their way back, they were attacked by missing nin-turned bandits. Your grandmother managed to fight and kill them, but not before being mortally wounded. By the time I arrived, she was already dead, and your father was missing." Madara clenched his fist. The tears that had been swimming in his eyes began to spill. I tried to save her. With the power of my Rinnegan, I managed to bring her soul back, at least temporarily." Naruto gave him a confused look. "What's the Rinnegan?" he asked. Madara felt a bit of the sadness he was feeling leave, at his grandson's innocent curiosity. It was so similar to his wife's. He wiped the tears from his eyes, and gave Naruto a brief history of the Rinnegan, and its abilities. When he had made sure Naruto understood it, Madara began to tell his story again. "Now, where was I? Oh, yes. As I said, I was able to revive your grandmother temporarily. You see, while my jutsu returned her, it didn't repair her body," he told Naruto grimly. "She only lived long enough to tell me that she had seen a kind man come and take Minato before her soul departed, and to tell me she loved me. I nearly broke down after that. Without her light, it became harder to fight the darkness. But I had to. She made me promise never to fall to that curse again, and I gave my word that I wouldn't," Madara said softly. He felt Naruto pat his arm comfortingly, and smiled at the small boy. With a shaky breath, he pulled himself together, looking back up at his grandson. His eyes reminded him so much of his wife, just like his son's had. Madara shook his head. He really was growing old, constantly lost in memories of his long life. "After your grandmother died, I took her body back to our home in the land of rivers, and buried her. From there, I set out to try and find your father, a journey that took me 22 years. I finally found him, in this very village. His first name was still the same, but he had received a new name in the orphanage," said Madara. He saw Naruto lean forward in anticipation. The boy looked at him pleadingly. "Who was he? Tell me about him, please. I've always wanted to know who my parents were," Naruto begged. Madara frowned at the desperation in his grandson's voice. It was a reminder of how he had lived his childhood so far in scorn. He smiled softly and placed a hand on Naruto's shoulder. "Of course I'll tell you who he was. I'll tell you who both your parents were," he told Naruto warmly. Naruto beamed happily at him. With a smile, he began to tell Naruto who his parents were, both their names, and as people. He told him of Minato's genius, and his quiet yet kind nature. He also told him about his mother, her fiery attitude and brash way of talking to others. Madara continued until he had exhausted the knowledge he had gained of his son and his son's wife, through his spying in the village. Although there were a few tears, they were happy ones. But Madara could see that something was bothering Naruto. He tried to hide it, but no matter how happy he became, it never disappeared. Finally, Naruto asked the question that was on his mind. It was one Madara had been hoping to put off. "Grandfather, you said that my mother was the Jinchuriki before me, right?" Naruto asked. Madara frowned. He could guess where this was going. He nodded nonetheless. "Then how did it escape? And why did they choose to seal it in me?" Naruto asked with a deep frown. The warmth from seeing his grandson's happiness at learning who his parents were, faded. In its place was a somberness. He had been expecting the question eventually, but he was hoping it would come at a later time. Sigh. I suppose I should tell you. You remember what I said about the other Rinnegan user? Madara asked Naruto. He nodded his head. On the night you were born, your mother's seal was weakened. When a female Jinchuriki gives birth, her seal becomes weak. Someone sought to take advantage of this when you were born. A masked man, who possessed the Sharingan. He said darkly. Naruto gasped in shock. He appeared that night, and forced your father to escape with you, leaving him alone with your mother. He extracted the Kyuubi from her, and set it loose on the village. I'm not sure how, but your father eventually broke his control over Kyuubi. After he did, Minato teleported it away. I arrived soon after. When I reached the place he had teleported it to, your parents had already begun the sealing. Kushina held the Kyuubi down, while Minato did the sealing. Unfortunately, Kushina's weakness got the best of her. She suffered a coughing fit, and her control on her chains holding the Kyuubi weakened. Kyuubi took advantage, and tried to prevent itself from being sealed, by killing you. Your parents stopped it. They threw themselves in front of its claw, and kept it from reaching you. They sacrificed themselves, to save you, Madara explained somberly. He looked Naruto in the eyes. Tears were swimming in the young boy's eyes. They did. He stuttered. Madara nodded seriously. Yes, they did. Your parents loved you very much, you were the best thing to ever happen to them. He told Naruto. The boy was still frowning slightly, though it had softened considerably. Then why did they seal the Kyuubi into me? Didn't they know what it would be like? Naruto asked. Madara sighed heavily. That was a difficult question to answer. He knew his son had at least a partially good reason for his actions, but another part was due to his naive nature. My son, your father, was an incredibly kind man. Perhaps too kind. Unfortunately, he could sometimes be naive. He had faith that the villagers would see you as a hero, faith in their goodness. After losing so much to the Kyuubi, there was little chance of being a hero. However, Madara looked at Naruto, who looked deeply upset. That was not the entire reason. I managed to get close enough to catch the very end of your parents' discussion about sealing the Kyuubi into you. You see, as Hokage, he wished to preserve the balance of the tailed beasts. Without a Jinchuriki, Konoha would have lacked a valuable war deterrent that would have left it vulnerable to enemy attack in its weakened condition. The biggest reason though, was that he knew the masked man would be coming back for it. He wanted to entrust you with its power so that you could stop the man when he came again. After all, who better to trust than his son? Madara could tell his words had gotten through to the boy. The tears that had been swimming in his eyes now poured down in thick streams from his eyes. Naruto began to sniffle. Well, then I guess I'm going to have to prove them are right. Naruto said. Madara smiled warmly. He placed his son on his grandson's shoulder, causing the boy to look up at him with his slightly puffy eyes. Then I will help you to train. I'll teach you all that I can, in order to help you defeat that man one day. He promised. Naruto beamed at him. Madara was taken by surprise when the child leapt from the bed and into his arms, hugging him tightly around the neck. He could feel his grandson's hot tears creating a wet spot on his robe. Thank you, grandfather. I can't believe I finally have a family. Naruto cried. Madara placed his arms around his grandson, and patted his back gently. There, no need to cry. You don't have to worry about being alone anymore, Naruto. He said softly. Sitting there comforting his grandson, Madara made a vow. Minato, Kushina, Kazuhana. I will not fail, not this time. Not again. Naruto will grow to be a better shinobi, and man, than any of our family before him. This, I swear. Nuc. A breeze passed through the trees, causing a constant rustling. The cool air like an icy chill on Shisui's slightly sweaty skin, easing his exhaustion somewhat. Blood ran down from his now empty right eye socket. He traveled at fast speeds through the foliage of the forests that made up Konoha's training grounds. Leaves of varying shades of green, from lime to emerald, blurring into a wall of color due to his speed. What do I do now? I can't go back to the clan like this, there'll be trouble because of the eye Danzo took, so what now? The Uchiha thought. The unruly-haired Uchiha couldn't help but curse, as he leapt from branch to branch. The, presumably former, one-eyed elder had ruined everything. Why did the old bastard have to interfere? His orders came from the third, yet the old war hawk had interfered. The bastard always had to think that he knew better, that the third was too soft, and he made decisions to interfere with the thirds, that usually made things worse. None more so than the current one. He had been so close to stopping his clan's coup d'état against Konoha. It was rather simple, use his unique genjutsu granted by his Mangekyo Sharingan on the leaders of the clan to stop the coup. But that was useless now, because the former Anbu commander of the disbanded root program, Danzo Shimura, had intercepted him, and stolen his right eye. Now he had to somehow keep the other out of his grubby hand, because it would be disastrous if the war hawk got a hold of the full power of the Koto Amatsukami. Still, he wanted his eye to help in protecting Konoha, even after his death. That meant he had to entrust it to someone. As that fact crossed his mind, the one-eyed Mon's features slowly twisted into a smirk. He wanted to entrust his powers to someone he knew would use them to protect the village. The unruly-haired Uchiha knew the perfect person to fit that bill, a person who already had a mission to stop the coup. Not only that, but maybe, just maybe, he could give Konoha a new set of Mangekyo eyes to protect it from the shadows for years to come. His smirk melted into a melancholy smile, as he finally cemented his plan. It seems I should get Itachi to meet me at the usual place, for a final farewell. And hopefully, I can give him the edge he needs to complete his mission successfully. The man stopped briefly on a branch. Around him the forest was painted orange, as the last rays of light started to disappear on the horizon. Crickets could be heard chirping in the night, as he flashed through a series of hand seals, ending on the ram hand seal. Channeling chakra to his tooth, to sharpen it and pierce his thumb. With a quick swipe across his palm that smeared the resulting blood across it, the unruly-haired Uchiha slammed his palm onto the wide branch he stood on. Poof! A plume of smoke erupted from where his palm met the bark, as the Uchiha prepared to send his message to his friend that was like a younger brother, feeling a twinge of sadness at the conversation to come. NUC. An inky black curtain stretched across the sky, and tiny pinpricks of light were beginning to come out, with one single, large white orb on high. The silvery light of the moon shone down on the rocky terrain to the side of the Hokage monument, casting the world into a gray tone. Shisui stood on a cliff overlooking the Naka River, with a small waterfall directly across from him. By now, the blood on his face had dried into a solid dark red sheet down his right cheek. Gazing out across the canyon with his single good eye, Shisui reflected on the events of the day. The day had started so well, he had planned on ending the ridiculous coup of his clan with his special genjutsu. But then, the damned bandaged-faced fossil had interfered, stealing his eye, and sending his little drones after him. He had gotten a slight break when 3 of them had broken off, allowing him to escape and get word to Itachi. The really strange part was, when he went back later and followed the trail of the 3 root ninja that had broken off, it had ended at the edge of a waterfall, and the only thing he had found was 3 patches of blackened earth. I wonder what happened. It looked almost as if fires had been set there. Fires to burn bodies, could they have been killed? But by who? This thought was prominent in Shisui's mind. As much as he hated to admit it, Root Anbu were skilled. For 3 to be killed was no small feat, and to be able to get rid of all traces of them to the point that even he couldn't find them, was even harder. With a sigh, Shisui closed his eye for a moment, before opening it slowly. He said, "So, you've finally arrived." Itachi. Behind him, a second man, who looked to be about 13 or 14, walked out onto the cliff, looking at Shisui with confusion. I had jet black hair, that was bound into a low ponytail, and onyx eyes. Pronounced hair troughs extended underneath his eyes, and his bangs were parted down the center. He wore the traditional Anbu attire with an Uchiha high-collar shirt underneath his gray body armor, a katana strapped to his back. "Why did you call me here, Shisui? Shouldn't we be at the meeting? The clan will get suspicious if I keep missing them," Itachi said as he approached the older Uchiha. Still looking at the small waterfall across from him, Shisui spoke without turning. "It no longer looks like the Uchiha coup d'état again be prevented." Itachi's eyes widened at Shisui's words. "If civil war begins in the Leaf, the other villages will be like sharks smelling blood in the water, and surely move to invade," stated Shisui bluntly. He looked at the sky. "Real war will then break out." Shisui finally turned to face Itachi, who gasped in shock at his closed eye and the large trail of blood. "When I tried to stop the coup d'état with the Koto Amatsukami, Danzo stole my right eye," said Shisui, as he looked at Itachi with his one good Mangekyo Sharingan. "He doesn't trust me. He intends to protect the village his way, no matter what it takes or how it looks." Turning, Shisui glanced at the canyon beside him. "I suspect he will come after my left eye as well," said Shisui, as he reached up to his eye. "So I want to give it to you before he has a chance," he continued, a sick squelching sound filling the air, as he ripped the eyeball from the socket, the optical nerve and blood vessel dangling from the orb clutched loosely in his hand. Blood dripped from his hand, which was stained with the crimson liquid. "You're the only person I can count on, my best friend." Smiling, he extended his hand to his friend. "Please protect the village, and the honor of the Uchiha name," said Shisui. Tears began to swim in Itachi's eyes. He slowly took the eye, ignoring the sliminess as he clutched it softly. "Why are you speaking this way, Shisui?" asked Itachi, although he already knew, he just didn't want to admit it. Shisui smiled teasingly at his friend. "Come now, we both know that if the clan finds out that my eye was taken, the coup will be hastened. To prevent this, I will make it look like I killed myself. I already left a suicide letter, now I will throw myself over the side of this cliff, and eliminate all traces of my body," he replied. Slowly, he began to back up, still facing Itachi's way as he threw his parting words at him. "Goodbye, my friend. Protect the clan name, and Sasuke. She is the future of our clan," said Shisui. "Wait, Shisui, don't do this," protested Itachi, only to be ignored. Shisui turned, and dashed to the edge of the cliff, throwing himself backwards and over the side. Itachi quickly dashed after him, stopping on the edge to see his friend falling towards the river below, forming hand seals rapidly. A peaceful smile was on his face, even as white-hot flames began to engulf his body. Itachi looked on in despair as his friend burned himself to ashes, his Sharingan becoming active. The tomo began to spin rapidly, until they morphed into an all-new shape, joining together with the pupil at the ends, forming a tri-bladed pinwheel. "Shisui," he shouted while he was forced to watch his friend disappear, the peaceful smile never leaving his face. The flames licked at his body, and his skin began to crack and blister as it slowly burnt. The sickly sweet fetor of cooked human flesh filled the air around him, his body disappearing into a trail of ashes. "Itachi, I have faith in you. This way, my death will mean something. And you can save the honor of the Uchiha name," thought Shisui, as he finally disappeared, only a trail of ash that slowly fell through the air and landed in the water below, being swept away on the current. With his dying breath, he had left his friend with a gift to help him for years to come.